Excited to introduce Julia Richies and Emma Devine, who are presenting on the FASD project. So take it away.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lou, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We thought this would be a really good opportunity to sort of go through and speak a bit more about the Learning with FASD project that myself and Julia and Lexine and many other people have been working on for the last 2 years. So we thought we would do a bit of the development, how we sort of came to the finished product of the website, as well as the next steps we've taken in terms of evaluation and dissemination. But before we get started, we would just like to quickly do an acknowledgement of country as well. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. I'm currently presenting to you today on the land of the Gadigal people. So just to give a quick overview of what your next 45 minutes or so is going to look like. We're going to start with an overview of what is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So going into a little bit of detail, it was certainly something that I think when we started working on the project, we didn't know quite as much about as we do now. We'll then go into the project background a little bit before speaking about the development of Learning with FASD, the website itself, and then finishing up with the Learning with FASD evaluation and dissemination process that we're undertaking at the minute. So to start off with Learning with FASD, we thought it would be good to sort of get you to do a nice interactive activity because we know everyone loves them. But we've got a quiz on the website that it's only 7 questions long. It's super brief. And it's just a little starting point to see, what do you know about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder or FASD? So I think we popped the link in the chat. Yeah, Julia's on it. Thank you. So we thought it would just it shouldn't take you very long, just a couple of minutes to give people an opportunity to run through those questions and shout out if you've got any problems accessing it or anything. So the reason we wanted to run through this quiz as a starting point is that there's quite a few misconceptions out there about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, what it is, what it looks like. Oh, thanks for sharing your percent, Lou. That was my next question, if anyone wanted to share. And certainly when I started this project, my percent would have been quite low as well. There's a lot of misconceptions on, the amount of alcohol that needs to be consumed for a child to have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. There's a lot of misconceptions about facial features, and Julia is going to speak a little bit more about them now. All right, so hopefully that's just set the scene for fetal alcohol spectrum a little bit. And what I'll do now is hand over to Julia to speak a little bit more about what FASD is and to maybe unpack some of and provide a bit more detail around some of the questions as well.
Oh, thanks, Emma. So yeah, what I was going to do is just kind of give you a bit of an overview of what fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is. So it's a diagnostic term used to describe the effects of prenatal exposure to alcohol. So alcohol is a known teratogen, so it's a toxin that can pass through the placenta to the unborn child, and it does interrupt normal development by damaging the brain and organs. So concerningly, between 50 to 70% of Australian women report drinking alcohol during pregnancy, which is actually one of the highest rates of alcohol consumption in pregnancy worldwide. So this does include the very early stages of pregnancy. So, for example, before someone might know they're pregnant, but the rate does stay around 25% of women who report alcohol consumption after knowledge of pregnancy. So there is no safe time or amount of alcohol use during pregnancy, but heavy drinking or binge drinking does carry the greatest risk. However, even low levels of alcohol consumption can cause FASD. And while we're here, I'll also just note that, as you might have just seen in the quiz, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is the only diagnostic terminology in Australia that should be used to describe an individual prenatally exposed to alcohol. So we no longer use the term fetal alcohol syndrome or alcohol-related birth defects or other similar terms. But unfortunately, we don't really have accurate estimates of prevalence rates of FASD in Australia. But based on international research in similar countries, experts estimate that it affects between 2 to 5% of the general population. So this does mean at the higher end of that estimate, that could be around 15,000 children being born with FASD in Australia each year. And the prevalence of FASD is higher among certain populations. So children in the care of child protection services, the youth justice system, some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and children in special education services. So the Lillawan project, which was carried out in the remote Fitzroy Valley area of WA, reported the prevalence of FASD might be as high as 12% in some high-risk Aboriginal communities. And the Banksia Hill project, which was the first study in Australia to assess young people in a youth custodial facility for FASD, actually found that 36% of children in the facility had FASD, which is the highest reported prevalence of FASD in a youth custodial centre worldwide. Kind of interestingly about that study too, they found 89% of children in that facility, so they were aged 10 to 17, had a severe impairment in at least one neurodevelopmental domain. And I think about 65 to 68 had a severe impairment in at least two. So I think that says a lot about, unfortunately, the state of the youth justice system in Australia. But to put all these kind of estimates in perspective, these estimates exceed the prevalence of autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, spina bifida, and cerebral palsy in Australia. So FASD is the leading preventable cause of non-genetic developmental disability in the world. So it is a lifelong disability, so the effects can actually vary considerably depending on the amount and timing of exposure to alcohol in utero. So it is often referred to as an invisible disability because it does often go undetected. So the characteristic features that you see on the screen are seldom apparent at birth, particularly as some research indicates that only a really small percentage of individuals with FASD will display the sentinel facial features. So that could be, less than 5%. Some research does say, about 20%, but it is definitely the minority. And that's because that's associated with particular timing of alcohol exposure in utero. So I think that has to happen in the first 12 weeks to actually display the facial features. So the disorder often isn't noticed until a child reaches school age, when behavioural learning difficulties become more evident. And I think one point that's really important to note about FASD is that the most common signs, particularly in the school environment, are expressed as, developmental delays, behavioural challenges, and learning difficulties. But it is really crucial for educators, particularly, to understand that it's a brain-based disorder. So that the focus should be on understanding that performance or impairments are based on, a brain injury, not deliberate misbehaviour. So every individual with FASD will obviously have their own strengths and challenges, but all have difficulty in at least 3 of the 10 neurodevelopmental domains listed there. But there is no typical pattern of impairment that, you might see in something like autism spectrum disorder or ADHD. So it can be quite difficult to diagnose. So obviously these neurodevelopmental domains are crucial for diagnosis, but children with FASD might also experience sensory processing issues, so being hyper or hypersensitive to certain sensations, problems with sleep, growth problems, and other issues relating to birth defects. So yeah, just a little bit of background to this specific project. Early diagnosis and appropriate intervention are really crucial to reduce the risks associated with FASD, such as that disrupted education, mental ill health, contact with the justice system, and harmful substance use. And at present, primary teaching and support staff receive little to no formal training about FASD, and resources are really scarce on the ground. But as I just noted, it is often first recognised when a child reaches school age and experiences those challenges in the school environment. So teaching and support staff can play a really vital role in recognising neurodevelopmental concerns, connecting families with health services, and implementing those supports in schools to make sure children with FASD are supported. So the Australian Government Department of Health funded this project to try and address the current gap in educators' skills and knowledge about FASD. So just to give you a better idea of the team that's involved in the project, we obviously have our core team here at Matilda, but we do also have a range of people from other universities and groups that have been helping out. So we've got Lou Newton at UNSW, Steve Alsop, Liz Elliott and Lauren Rice, who are also at UCID, who are heavily involved in the Lillawong project. And also Sue Thomas from the Marnamore Takura Women's Resource Centre, which is located in Fitzroy Crossing in WA. And then we also have an expert advisory group, which is made up of people with particular knowledge of FASD, so academics, researchers, lived experience, participants, and also an education subcommittee, which has people with that really specific education experience. So we've conducted the project or the development in 3 phases. So the first phase was really our research, planning and consultation phase. Phase 2 was the collaborative development and focus testing. And then we're currently in phase 3, which is the development, promotion and evaluation. So I'll just talk you through sort of what we did in phase 1 at the start of the project. So we first conducted a scoping review of international Australian existing resources that provide educators with knowledge and skills, with the particular aim of building capacity to recognise and support students who are displaying problems consistent with FASD. So we looked at both grey and peer-reviewed literature. So grey-lit in this case included FASD organisation websites, government websites, Google search engine, app stores, streaming services, probably anything you can think of. And we also looked at 9 peer-reviewed databases as well. So we ended up screening just over 3,000 resources and assessed around 300 full text. And at the end, we identified 124 resources that were relevant for the primary education sector. So 119 of these had information on support or management strategies, while only 23 had information designed to assist educators to recognise and understand students who display problems consistent with FASD. So you can see here that the resources largely originated from the US and Canada, which makes sense as these places are a little ahead of us in terms of their research and response to FASD. And a smaller percentage came from Australia, the UK and New Zealand. And you can see in this chart here the types of resources we found. So it was predominantly text-based resources, so fact sheets, longer guides, booklets, that sort of thing, followed by videos, podcast episodes, a couple of screening tools, professional development modules, and a handful of interventions and games for students. So we evaluated all of their resources on their evidence base, impact and utility, generalizability, availability, currency, ease of use, credibility, and applicability. So we actually used a composite of 2 tools to do this. So we have an adapted version of the NHMRC form framework and another tool called the IK Guideline Quality Checklist. So each component received a grade from poor to excellent. So you can see the A, B, C, D at the bottom there. And then based on these overall scores, we calculated a weighted score for each resource, with evidence base, impact and utility and currency scores being given the highest weighting, of which I've got some of the results up on the slides now. So most resources were sort of average to good quality, but only 13% of identification resources and 3% of management support resources received an excellent quality score. So you can see overall the resources weren't doing great on evidence base. So only 7% had actually been formally evaluated with findings published. And then impact and utility here referred to the amount and usefulness of resource content. So we are doing a little better here, around 20% of resources covered issues comprehensively. And then regarding currency, which I don't have up on the screen, about 65% of resources were developed in the previous decade and considered current, but only 4% were regularly updated. So the review identified the following priority areas for resource development. So there was a need for information on referral pathways for diagnosis or management. There was a clear need for high quality, short format, evidence-based resources. So we found a lot of long text guides. So think, 60+ pages, and a minority were considered of excellent quality. So the length of all these resources were a particular concern when you consider how time poor teaching and support staff are. They just don't have time to sit down and read a 100-page document. And there was also a need for an evaluation of resources for their feasibility and effectiveness, and just a general need to improve the accessibility of resources, particularly including professional development and training. So once we had the findings from the scoping review, we then conducted formative consultations with 18 FASD or education experts and also 33 educators. So they included teachers, principals, learning and support staff, school psychologists, among others, from metropolitan, regional and remote areas. And our experts came from sort of research, health, not-for-profit, social work, psychology and the education sector. So the goal of the consultations were to seek feedback on currently available resources. So we did show participants a selection of the highest rated resources identified in the review. We wanted to identify current gaps in the available suite of resources for primary teaching and support staff. We wanted to identify the needs of education staff and sort of key barriers to obtaining information on FASD, and also identify priority areas for resource development. So based on the findings of the review and consultations, we identified these key areas and needs. So as I already noted, a key finding from the review was the lack of high quality evidence-based resources that had undergone sort of any evaluation. And the educator consultations specifically emphasized the need for information on the impact of FASD on learning behavior, and a need for information on how to engage with parents and caregivers and work with families, which wasn't something we'd sort of found in the review or considered. And then finally, strategies that could be used in the classroom. And then findings from the consultations with experts highlighted the current sort of low awareness of FASD in the education sector, sort of low accessibility of resources, and a particular need for information on referral and diagnostic pathways, of which no resources were identified in the review. So if you are interested in reading a bit more about the review and the consultations, the findings have been published, and you can find them at the QR code. We can also send that through after. So that brings us to our second phase. So once we identified the needs of primary school educators and sort of the existing gaps, the next phase was the collaborative development of focus testing of learning with FASD and the resources that we were developing. So the team worked on developing a strategic plan that would inform resource development, which we sent out to our education subcommittee, which consists of educators with a special interest in FASD and representatives from the Departments of Education, New South Wales, Queensland and WA. It was also sent to members of our expert advisory group for review. So once we received feedback from those groups, we finalised 9 resources that we were going to develop. And we're covering 3 main topics on the portal. So the first topic is understanding FASD, which is providing information on FASD and the impacts on learning and behaviour. And the second topic is classroom strategies that can be used by educators to support children in the classroom. And the third topic was family engagement. So those resources that gave educators information on engaging parents or caregivers of children with FASD, which is really important given what we know about how important it is to have collaboration and consistency across the school and home context. So the idea was the resources would come in lots of different types. So we've got fact sheets, videos, a referral guide, an interactive checklist of common presentations of FASD in the school environment, and the quiz, which we just made all of you do. So we're also housing existing high quality resources on the portal that were identified through the scoping review. So in terms of the development process, so the resources and website were developed using a multi-stage review process, and that at each stage refinements were made by the research team based on feedback. So just to explain that in a little more detail, first we used an iterative process to produce the first draft of the resource within the research team. And we then sent them to our expert consultant who's an experienced educator with particular knowledge and expertise of FASD in an Australian context. So after incorporating her feedback, we then sent our resources onto our EAG and the subcommittee and received feedback from a total of 16 members. And this feedback was also incorporated before sending them out for review by primary teaching support staff, FASD and education experts, and also parents and caregivers of children with FASD. So a total of 42 people provided feedback at this stage of the development. So what I'm going to do now is just hand back over to Emma to talk you through what we came up with.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julia. So we've spoken now about, understanding the current context of FASD resources available in Australia. And we're really quite proud as well of how many people we were able to get to review and have a look at these resources before they became the finished Learning with FASD product that I'm about to show you now. So as Julia mentioned, the website is organized around 3 main topics. So the first is understanding FASD. And under this topic, we developed, we have 4 resources in total. We've got a text-based resource, which is called FASD in a School Environment. And this describes the way in which FASD may present itself in the context of different school environments. So how it might present itself in a maths class versus an English class or outside on the playground. We've also got a video that's called What is FASD, which in a surprise, I think to nobody, provides some information on what is FASD, what it is, the impacts that it can have on an individual as well. The third resources we have under this topic is a guide to the referral and diagnostic process. So this was one of the resources that that we found in the review just wasn't available in an Australian context. So we developed one that outlines 6 stages in the referral and diagnostic process in the context of identifying concerns in a school setting. So being clear about what the role of the teacher was versus what was definitely not the responsibility of the teacher and not something we wanted to come across as adding more to a teacher's workload. And then the 4th resource under this topic is another short video called A Day in the Life. So what a child with FASD might experience during a day at school. And this depicts the common difficulties that a child may experience and how their mood gets depleted throughout the day. So as Julia mentioned, FASD can often manifest itself in behaviors that come across as misbehavior. So we're really trying to convey that, it's not misbehavior, it is a brain-based disorder. And it's all sort of a culmination of many things that an individual can be triggered by that can maybe result in that sort of meltdown behavior that is seen in the school context. I was just going to hop on. I'm going to steal the screen share off Julia just to show you one of the resources on the website itself. So we want to just go through the Understanding FASD in a School Environment one. So this was one of our most tricky ones, I think is fair to say, Julia, to develop, but one that we are really happy with how it turned out. So we've got a little explanation at the beginning of, being clear on what the purpose of this tool was. It's not a screening or diagnostic tool, explaining how FASD and some of the resulting behaviors can manifest in a school setting. And then what we've done is we've broken it up by what we've called school domain. So common presentations that you might see in a classwork context are things like requires longer to take in and respond to visual and auditory information, or things like struggles with planning and/or has difficulty knowing where to begin a task. So we've got classwork, we've then got numeracy that you can have a look at. So maybe difficulty with simple calculations and understanding numerical information. Physical skills is another one. So this might manifest in difficulty with letter formation or holding a pencil, a slow writing pace, and also some social skills as well. And what we've also got, you can see down the side, is we've got little icons. So Julia spoke earlier about the 10 neurodevelopmental domains that are impacted by FASD and how for a diagnosis of FASD, there needs to be impairments in at least 3 of these neurodevelopmental areas. So we decided that this information wasn't directly, or it wasn't the most important thing for a primary school educator trying to learn more about FASD, but we have provided this key down the right-hand side, should an educator be interested in knowing more about this. So if we scroll down to the bottom, you can see the key here. So this little symbol is links to the neurodevelopmental domain of motor skills. This one is language, and so on. And at the end of each resource, we have all of our references to really back and support the importance that we placed on making sure that these resources are all evidence-based and reliable resources. So I think we hand back over to you briefly, Julia, is it, with the slides, to go to our second topic. There's my little stop share going. There. Thanks, Julia. So our second topic, as Julia has mentioned, was classroom strategies. And for this topic, we developed two resources. So the first is a fact sheet that contains strategies that a teacher or support staff can implement in the classroom to support a child in their ongoing learning. While the second one is adjustments and modifications that can be made to the teaching environment itself, so the classroom, that can also help support a child with FASD in flourishing and thriving as best they can in the school context. So we wanted to show you again one of our favorites, and also one that is also highly downloaded, we can see, and highly accessed, which is great. So here we've got the how to create a supportive learning environment for primary age children with FASD. So again, we've got an introduction, and then we've got sort of 8 tips, I'm pretty sure this is the one with 8, of things that a teaching or support staff could implement in their classroom, with some more specific examples of that as well. So the first one here is creating a calm and uncluttered learning environment. And we've got some suggestions about minimizing the items on a student's desk or in their workspace, so their direct environment. Also minimizing visual distractions. So oftentimes primary school classrooms can be really colorful. There can be a lot of things hanging on the wall from the ceiling. And it's just about thinking about, are there some that are maybe not necessary? Are there some that you could remove from a child's immediate environment as well? Fidget items, planned seating arrangements, so that idea of structure, that idea of routine, that ties into the layout as well. And the idea of a breakaway space. So is there somewhere that the child can go when they are feeling overwhelmed, when they are not coping maybe as well with whatever triggers are in the classroom environment? And I guess to flag, and you may be thinking it yourself, that these are not necessarily FASD specific. So while there is an evidence basis to support that they do and can support a child with FASD, they could also be really helpful for children with other learning difficulties, autism, ADHD, and those sorts of things as well. And just to say as well that all of the resources that we've developed are also available in a PDF format on the website. So users can go in and they can download all of the resources and use them offline as well. So just to give you an idea of what that would also look like in a PDF format, with everything, including the references at the bottom. And then that brings us to our third topic. So that's the family engagement, and we also developed 2 resources for this topic as well. So the first was a fact sheet titled Collaborating with Parents and Caregivers. So this is an interactive information sheet, and it's designed to assist teaching and support staff in communicating effectively with a child's family. So it's something that the teachers and parents could come together to fill out, to talk through, and it's got prompts to really make sure that the conversation is focused sort of from a strengths-based perspective as well. And the second is a short video that provides tips for engaging parents and caregivers when you notice a child is having difficulties in the classroom. So we wanted to just quickly show you one of the videos that we've developed.
Hopefully the sound works, but let me know if it doesn't.
Tips for engaging with parents and caregivers. When you notice a child is having difficulties in the classroom, one of the most important things you can do as an educator is to engage with their parents or caregivers. During these initial conversations, we do not recommend that you use terms like FASD or neurodevelopmental disabilities, as these conditions should be diagnosed by health professionals. Instead, the aim is to work together to ensure the child gets the support they need in the classroom. The earlier a student receives appropriate support in the classroom, the better their long-term outcomes. In this video, we'll provide you with some tips for these initial conversations. Listen with empathy and respect to gain an understanding of the child's background. Parents and caregivers report that being listened to and heard by educators, as well as being involved in their child's education, is incredibly helpful in ensuring their child's success at school. When communicating with parents or caregivers to gain an understanding of the child's background, it is important to remember that caring for a child with a disability has a multi-dimensional impact on caregiver and family functioning. Daily activities can take increased time and effort, and caregivers often experience high levels of stress and worry. In some cases, families may be experiencing trauma in an ongoing or intergenerational manner. It's important to keep these points in mind when communicating with parents or caregivers. Take a strengths-based approach. It's important to focus on a student's strengths in the school environment instead of the difficulties they are experiencing. A strengths-based approach benefits parents or caregivers by promoting an optimistic outlook, reducing stress and worry, and helping families to engage in healthier coping strategies. It also has a range of positive outcomes for the student, including increases in competence, academic achievement, and quality of life. Implement strategies supported by input and communication with parents and caregivers. Implementing evidence-based strategies that are consistent between school and home is very important for successful outcomes for students with FASD. Ongoing input from and communication with parents and caregivers is crucial for promoting consistent educational and behavioural practices across settings. Some helpful strategies that could be implemented include maintaining a stable and consistent routine, adapting communication styles to be short, concrete and simple, repetition and positive reinforcement, learning triggers to avoid meltdowns. So, when engaging the parents or caregivers of a child that is having difficulty in the classroom, remember to 1. Listen with empathy and respect. 2. Take a strengths-based approach. 3. Implement strategies supported by input from parents and caregivers.
Julia. So just to give you a little taster of some of the resources that we do have up on the website, obviously feel free to go and have a look at any of the others or share with anyone if you think they might be useful for them. But moving now on to the last part of today, which is also the last phase of the project. So phase 3, which is all about the dissemination, promotion and evaluation of learning with FASD. So I'm going to start by speaking a little bit about the evaluation first. So we've developed the website. Obviously, a lot has gone into making sure that the resources and everything are as good as they could be before getting to this point. But now that we have the finished website, it was really important to us that we evaluated it to make sure that it was, I guess, providing what our intended user group needed, and I found it useful and all of these things. And in order to evaluate the Learning with FASD website, we use the GoodWeb framework. So just to start off with a bit of an explainer on what that is, it was developed by Alison and colleagues, really in response to there being no consensus on how websites should be evaluated, and a really wide variety of approaches that are taken by different people. So what they tried to do was they conducted first a scoping review. to identify all of the existing methodologies and techniques that have been used out there to evaluate websites. And they found a total of 69 studies that had evaluated websites and met their criteria. So what they did then was they tried to synthesize all of these into one cohesive and comprehensive framework. So, sorry, just the next one, I've made a mess of the notes on that for you. Essentially what the GoodWeb framework does is there are 4 things and 4 decisions that you need to make, and they advocate for, these being different depending on the website that you're trying to evaluate. So what sort of content, what sort of engagement your user group would likely have with the website, as well as the overall aims that you're trying to get out of the evaluation itself. So what do you want to know at the end of your evaluation? And they synthesized this down into 4, they're pretty broad, but 4 questions that should be answered before you embark on an evaluation of a website. So the first is, what are the most important website attributes that affect a user's experience on the website you're trying to evaluate? What is the best way to evaluate these attributes? Who should be the one doing the evaluation? And what settings should be used for the chosen methods and to maximize sample size? So we took these 4 components, and this was the approach that we took. So the attributes that we chose to evaluate for the Learning with FASD website were the appearance of the website, the content on the website, how easy it was to use, interactive elements on the website, technical adequacy, loyalty, and satisfaction. So these were the attributes that were most frequently assessed by researchers and the results of the scoping review that Alison and colleagues did. And they're also the ones that were used in a subsequent evaluation of another sort of information health-based website. So that was our reasoning behind choosing these same attributes. In terms of the best way to evaluate the attributes, we felt a survey was the best way. So we included components like time to browse the website, both rankings and ratings of things on the website, as well as some open-ended questions to get more information. In terms of the third part about who should evaluate the website, we thought that users of the website would be the most useful group at this stage. So other options that Alison covered that can be used at this website are things like experts, web developers, so depending on what you're trying to establish. But at this stage of our project, we felt users were absolutely the most important group. And then in terms of for our chosen method on point 2 and to maximize sample size, we felt that, a remote survey, so didn't need to be face-to-face in order to complete the components. And this way we could also maximize the sample by recruiting as broadly in Australia as we could. So just to provide a little bit more detail on the website attributes that we chose. So each of the bigger categories, so the ones on the left-hand side, do have subcategories associated with them. So if we're looking at appearance, we did also ask more specifically about things like the colors, the fonts, use of media like pictures, videos to make it more engaging, page length, so not having too much scrolling happening, the style of the website, and sort of the overall look and feel of the website to the user. For content, some of the subcategories included, how understandable the content was, whether the content on the website covered the depth and breadth of the topic, whether it was current, whether it was timely, relevant specifically to the user group, evidence-based, and whether it was unique, whether it was different to what was already out there and available. In terms of ease of use, we looked at things like how easy it was to navigate back to the homepage if you got lost, if it was easy to remember sort of the way around the website, sort of where you were going when you clicked on various things, whether the content was organized in a way that was easy to understand, to access, and things like multi-language availability. In terms of interactivity, we looked at a sense of community. We looked at whether there was modern features on the website, so Twitter, functionality in terms of emailing things through to a friend. Technical adequacy was, valid links, appropriate load time, not too many plugins, compatibility with browsers and things like that. So the basic workings of the website. And then 2 other were sort of participants' response to the website. So their loyalty, so would they use the website, would they recommend the website to someone else, and their satisfaction, so how useful they felt it would be for them, general enjoyment of being on the website, and enjoyment of the look and feel of the website itself. So these are the main ones that we looked at. So we got a total of 75 participants to complete our survey. I don't know if anyone else is having a hard time getting survey completions, but I know Positive Choices was as well. So we're pretty happy with 75 in the end. And just to run through a couple of demographics first. So the majority of our sample, so 89%, was a woman or female. I guess well, this is what we were expecting, given that there do tend to be more women working in the primary education sector as well. But we got a few men in there. We were happy to see that we did get at least one person completing the survey from every state. Obviously not as many in some as others, but we were really happy to see, obviously New South Wales is where we were based, so that explains that one, but also WA and Victoria was really great to see as well. We've got a lot of our sample, almost half of it, coming from regional areas, which was great to see, 37% from metropolitan and 13% from remote. And we've got quite a diverse spread of professions, so school-based relevant professions who took part in the survey. So we had 33% were teachers, nope, 33, not percent, were teachers, 17 were education assistants, we had 6 principals, 5 school counsellors, 2 school psychologists, and 2 youth workers. And we did have 10 others who had sort of similar related disability support type roles in a school setting. So I wanted to start, what we asked the participants to do first was to rate, independent of the FASD websites, but to rate the importance of some of our main website attributes, how important they were to them as a primary school educator in accessing education websites. So 1 was the most important and 5 was the least important. And of the 5 attributes that we asked them to rank, so this is just generally speaking education websites, they ranked the content on the website to be the most important thing to them. They ranked interactivity to be second, ease of use third, appearance fourth, and technical adequacy last, which is interesting because I would be surprised if you get website working and then have any of the other things if there was no technical adequacy. I just thought it would be interesting to pop in as well that we've run the same or similar survey on the Positive Choices side evaluation, where we also asked secondary school teachers and parents to rank these 5 website attributes in order of importance. And we can see some similarities. Nobody thinks that the technical adequacy of a website is particularly important, which I think they would find themselves wrong in that if it weren't good. But where we see most of a difference is that primary school teachers seem to rate interactivity quite a bit higher than both the secondary school teachers and parents do. So, I mean, this is just really useful to be aware of, so you can tailor a website to best suit your user group and what they think is important or what they need out of the website that you're creating. We also asked our participants to rate, this might be a little small on your screen, sorry, but I'll point out some of the important things. But we asked the participants to also rate the degree to which the Learning with FASD website achieved the subcategories of our 5 website attributes. So the question was, the Learning with FASD website has attractive and appealing colors, for example, and the participants rated on a Likert scale, 1 being strongly agree and 5 being strongly disagree, the extent to which they thought Learning with FASD had attractive and appealing colors. So there's a lot going on, but there's just a few things to point out. So overall, Learning with FASD scored pretty well. So the means range from about 1.7 to 3.6. So none of them went down to the sort of disagree side, which was nice. And then taking a closer look, we can see that Learning with FASD scored the highest on clarity of content, meaning that they found the content on the website easy to understand and very sort of approachable and take on boardable, for want of a better word. Some of the other subcategories that Learning with FASD performed very well on was overall impression of the appearance. This included fonts, and we scored very well on technical adequacy in terms of valid links, good load time, and limited use of plugins, which was good as well. Some of the categories that Learning with FASD scored the lowest on were the interactivity subcategories. So things like the website having modern features like Twitter, sharing via email, things like that. And while Learning with FASD does have the functionality to share resources via email and other platforms, it is predominantly an information-based website. So on the whole, interactivity is not the highest. But this might be something that we should think about going forward, as we saw that the primary school educators are tending to rate interactivity quite highly. The last two website attributes are satisfaction and loyalty. So satisfaction is blue, and we saw that 91% of participants believe the website would be useful to educators to support children with FASD. 88% thought it would be easy to use. And in terms of loyalty, 90% said that they would use the website themselves in the future, and 92% that they would recommend it to a friend or colleague. Just really quickly, the last thing that we are doing and that we're sort of ongoing now to the end of the project is to disseminate the website, to make as many people know about Learning with FASD as we can. And there are a number of streams that we're currently running in order to achieve this. So the first was that around the time of the website launch, we sent an email and a hard copy mail out to every primary, combined and special school in Australia. So this came to just under 8,000 schools in total. We've also been disseminating the website through digital marketing, so Google Ads, search engine marketing, social media, LinkedIn, and trying to build connections with existing networks, so Matilda, projects like Positive Choices, as well as more external organizations like FASD Hub and No FASD, trying to get some cross-pollination and sort of collaboration there. We also run quarterly webinars for primary teaching and support staff. And we aim for these to have a very practical and real world focus. And this was something that we got from feedback as well. That is what our users wanted. So our next webinar, for example, will be a panel discussion, and we'll have 3 experienced educators, and they're going to discuss their experience, recommendations for working with children with FASD. We've also got a quarterly e-newsletter that we send out to our subscribers. All are welcome to join. And we've also been disseminating the resources and websites at conferences. So FASD specific ones, as well as teacher focused ones, and also some research conferences as well. And then just super simple, not a very detailed digital report. I can see Rob and Felicity not being super proud of this one, but we did just want to show that since our launch, we have had almost 4,000 users on the website, which we're pretty happy about, and we're hoping to see that just grow and grow over the next while. So yeah, just to say a big thank you. It was great to be able to share a little bit about Learning with FASD, and happy to take any questions.